friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And yes, I'm here for yet another video on how to use the jar sealing vacuum chamber that Patrick makes and puts up on our Etsy store. So after this video, if you think you're interested in purchasing one, then you can look in the description box down below. Our Etsy store link is always the top link in the description box. Part of the reason for me reshooting this is I got a couple of updates I want to cover, and I'm trying to get everything all into one video that I can also put on the description at the store site so people have something that will cover all these different things. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is how to use the vacuum chamber. So what we have here is we have two different ones. The size of the chamber itself is all the same. The difference is the size of this little fitting here. Now this fitting right here will fit a hose that has a 4 mm inner diameter, but what I call this is 6 mm. I should really go change all that wording, but what that means is the 6 mm is the outer dimension of your hose, and that's going to be your standard food saver hose, and it should have an inner dimension of 4 mm, and that's what fits on this perfectly. So I'll show you one right here. For example, this one right here is from a food saver where I cut one of the ends off. And if you have a dual end where one is gray and one is green and you go to cut it off, you'll need the green end. If you're using it with a food saver, you'll need that green end to hook to your food saver pump. If your end looks like this, either end will work. It doesn't matter. So both of these are our old food saver hoses, and this will fit very snugly on there. You don't even have to jam it on there very tight. You should just be able to put it past, these are little barb fittings, and you should just be able to put it up to that first barb and it should be fine. The other one is the 10 mm. Again, these measurements are going by the outer diameter on the hose, but I really should be going by what the inner diameter is, because that's what matters most. The outer diameter can be the same, but if the inner diameter is a little bit different because the thickness of the hose is different, then that can cause a problem in how tight it fits on this barb fitting here. And that is to go with the brake bleeder pump, like I have right here. So the brake bleeder pump hose should be, in most cases, should be the right size to fit onto this chamber here. In fact, when I hook mine up, I keep it attached. I have two of these now, and I keep one attached to my chamber at all times so I don't have to try to keep taking that off. And again, we have the adapter hose, which if you buy a full brake bleeder kit, then you should have a short hose about this size, as well as two like this. So it gives you a few different options. So you may not need, if you're going to buy one of these, you may not need to buy this adapter hose if you have the full brake bleeder kit, because you might already have one of these. But this one we know does fit tight to this chamber. So what I have here is I actually just unsealed this. It was sealed fine. Is a jar of pecans that I put in here from 2019. Let's cover this part first. It is important that when you put the lid on, don't put it on as tightly as you would when you're canning, pressure canning, water bath canning with a metal lid. Just turn it enough until the jar moves. Do not put it on any tighter than that. Some people put their bands on as tight as they are going to do if they're going to can with it, but that's not going to get a seal on your jar, because it has to be just loose enough that when you have it in the chamber and you're pumping the air out, it's got to be able to pump the air out of the jar as well in order for the lid to seal, and that's not going to happen if you have that on too tight. It might, but it was going to take a lot longer. And then you're going to take your jar and gently, you can even consider putting a little padding down there, but depending on the height of your jar, it might take up too much room. But you can see this is a standard jar, a quart-sized jar. You should have a few inches of space, because look at the length. Now this lid does shorten up as you tighten it down. One of the things I did discover that can cause your chamber to not seal properly is if when you put this lid on, check your lid. Sometimes when we get them, they're a little cockeyed like that. And if they are like that, no matter how tight you get that, it's not going to be able to tighten up enough for you to be able to pull a vacuum on your chamber. So you want to make sure you back your wing nut off enough in order to kind of get that all nice and level, make sure it's straight. Then go ahead and put that on your chamber. And then you're going to tighten this down as far as you can. If this isn't tightened all the way, air is going to escape either from here or from here. You have to have it on there tight enough that you can pick up your chamber with the jar inside it, the filled jar inside it. Now I'm going to take the hose to the brake bleeder pump and push it on there. It doesn't have to go on there very far. And now, and of course this is if you're using the brake bleeder pump. And then what you're going to do is you're going to start pumping. I have two different brake bleeder pumps. This is the better one. It works a little faster. It just pumps better. If you're using brake bleeder pump, make sure you rest it against your counter and pump using your arm rather than squeezing it like this, because that's going to tire your arms and your hands and your forearms out, especially if you have arthritis. This is going to be the easier way. It's still going to be a little tiring on the arms, but you want to go up to at least 400 or 15, whichever number you're going at. And if you can go past, then that's a good idea there. Now, once you get to there, it should have sealed your jars. So take your lid off. You should hear some air escape. Okay, hopefully you heard that. And if you heard air escape, then you know that did pull a vacuum. Also, this needle would not move if you're not pulling a vacuum. Okay, so let's test it. Right, the jar is sealed. Okay, so now I'm going to put my band back on there a little tighter than I would for vacuum sealing. Ta-da! I magically changed. Well, actually what happened was after I finished that whole video, I realized there was a few other things that I wanted to add in here, plus a new little tidbit of information I got from one of our customers who bought this. One of those little pointers I meant to say when I was talking about the fact that your lid might be a little cockeyed. The other thing is, even if it's not, but you're having a hard time tightening that down, well, these newer lids sometimes just need a little working to make them tighten up better. And just simply loosen it up and squish them around like that. And when I think of it now, because I know this, I try to do that at least a little bit before I send these off to you and then tighten it back down. But if yours is still hard to work, or maybe I forgot, just use that little method there. And another thing I wanted to point out is that I'm always talking about that particular food saver because that is what I was comparing the 6mm chamber to. I'm only going off these older models and more simplified models, but this is no guarantee that the hose on any newer model, because now I know there's one where it has a built-in hose that looks very different, and so does the attachment. I am unsure at this point what size that hose is, but you can also measure that hose yourself before you do any cutting on that and see if that outer diameter on that little black hose is 6mm, then it should fit on that chamber. I can't guarantee it, but usually there's ways around things even if you want to not have to cut your hose. Like one lady that just recently sent me this picture right here. So she took a hose from a medical bag, I guess it's used for dialysis patients, and it's got its own little attachment, and she was able to fit that perfectly over the end of her food saver tip, and then that little adapter piece fits inside the adapter hose that she also purchased from us to go with hers. And so that worked for her. So really what it boils down to is if your setup is different than what I've been showing you, maybe you don't even have a food saver, maybe you have a completely different type of pump or different type of vacuum sealing system, I do believe that no matter which chamber you get, you should be able to find a way to make it work. I've seen so many people be creative when their setup didn't work and ways to make it work. So I just wanted to say that real quick because I am in no way affiliated to Food Saver. I was only using my personal Food Saver as an example of what you can do. It doesn't mean it's going to work that same exact way for everyone. So you just got to be creative. I do believe that anyone can make it work. Now, I'm not going to be using my Food Saver pump at all in this because I was trying to demonstrate and now I can't even get this accessory hose to stay plugged in to this, and so that's very frustrating. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this other brake bleeder. This is the one I don't like as much and it takes longer for it to pump up, but it does still work. And I'm going to use this with that using a 6mm hose with the 4mm inner diameter, 6mm outer. You'll see here as I have it jammed up inside the brake bleeder pump hose. So you should be able to do this. All right, so if your Food Saver like mine gives out, stops pumping, whatever, or your dumb little thing doesn't want to stay in there anymore, then you can always resort to the brake bleeder pump to make this work. Again, you should only have to push it up to just to or past that first barb. The farther you push it on there, the harder it is going to be to get off. So I'm going to put this band on just tight enough to hold that lid in place, and then carefully put that down inside my chamber. Doing all the same things, making sure your lid is straightened and not cockeyed at all. Put that lid on tight so there's no air escaping, and you might be able to hear the air escaping if you stop pumping and listen. If you don't see the needle moving at all, then it's not pulling a vacuum. So it probably means you don't have your lid on tight enough, or it might be cockeyed. And so with the adapter hose inside the brake bleeder pump hose, you can see the needle is moving and I'm still pulling a vacuum on this thing. Let's test it and see. Make sure you're not holding it over the floor, but hold it over your counter. Just pick it up a little bit. That way you'll know it has sealed. Right, let's talk a little bit about using non-canning jars. So both of these jars, they're a little bit different from each other. One is shorter and wider, where the other one's taller and more slender. Both of these will fit inside the vacuum chamber, and I'm not going to open these up and show you and reseal them again, because once I get a good seal on these inside my vacuum chamber, they're really hard to open, and I don't want to go through that, and I want to prevent having to pry on this. So usually the only way I can do this is put a spoon under here and gently pry it. I try to be very careful, but I don't want to do that any more than I have to, because if these lids get bent here, then you're not going to be able to get a good seal on them again. But these were all sealed. I have a whole bunch of these. All of them were sealed with my vacuum chamber. But I do want to show you that this one here, it just barely fits. That's the taller one inside the chamber. And you'll see the lid kind of just sort of sits on there. However, I can still get a good seal, because once you start tightening this down like this, you'll see that it shortens up this lid this way, and then it will work. And same thing will apply when you go to put the lid on. Don't wrench it on super tight, just put it on there. Let's talk about those few issues that other people are having. So if you've already purchased your chamber and you're like, okay, this isn't working, what I'm doing, what's wrong? So we covered the problem with the lid. It could be that the lid's cockeyed, even if you're getting it on there as tight as you can. If it's cockeyed, it's likely not going to pull a seal. So make sure you straighten it out, and then also make sure you get that down tight enough. If it's not pulling a vacuum, then see if you can tighten that down even more. Some other issues can be, and here's one of the things that's really frustrating, is your brake bleeder pump hose, even if the outer diameter is the same, it's 10 millimeter, that inner diameter could be just slightly bigger, which would mean that when you go to put it on this barb fitting right here, it might be a little bit loose, and it might not be able to pull a good vacuum. That has happened to a couple of people. And one lady that had this problem, what she did was she took her hose, and remember, I like to leave mine permanently attached actually to mine so I don't have to hassle with taking it off, because it is kind of a pain getting that hose back off. So what she did, I'm going to put a picture right here, is she took a little bit of Teflon tape, though I'm not positive the Teflon tape will be necessary, but it would definitely help create an even tighter seal. And then she just got one of those little metal clamps. They're pretty cheap down at your hardware store, and just clamp that on there tight. So I'm sure what she does is she probably just leaves that hose always attached. Your brake bleeder kit should come, as I said, with a hose like this. So even if that is too loose on there, because it probably is going to be the same size as your kit, then you can have that little short hose attached permanently with that clamp and that tape. And then what you can do is find yourself a hose like this, but make sure, like we do sell both of these, but make sure that it not only fits tightly inside this hose, but it fits tightly inside your brake bleeder pump hose, which this particular one, it does not. However, this one I showed you here, it does, this cheaper one. So this one fits snugly inside this hose. This hose here is just a tiny bit smaller. So just that little bit of difference makes the difference on how this fits inside this hose. However, I don't have a problem connecting this particular brake bleeder pump to my vacuum chamber. What I'll do is I'll link to this one because it's back in stock, and it's actually $5 less than what I initially paid for it. And I bought another one since when I saw that they had them back in, so that I could have the two. And then I have them all set up for different uses. So I have this one set up so I can test these chambers like this to make sure there aren't any issues with them. And so far we haven't had any chambers themselves that are problematic. It's actually an issue. Again, it comes back to what people are using, and the fitting of the hose, or even their pump might be weak. Now that I've covered this about the brake bleeder, you might just have to mess around with hoses to find something that's going to fit, and then try using your adapter hoses, or getting your own adapter hose. Again, we sell these adapter hoses, but depending on the size of your other hoses, they may not solve some of your problems, but they might be helpful in other ways. So one of the things, as you can see here, this was a Food Saver hose that I cut in half so that I could use one end, and I was just demonstrating so people could see that if you end up cutting your Food Saver hose at all, you can, or whatever pump you're using, I would say cut it in the middle so that then you can always patch it back together with an adapter hose, that your Food Saver hoses or whatever hoses you have will fit snugly inside. And this will work. I've done that, just like you can see that I did here with this. So I've got the adapter hose inside this hose, and that worked just fine. If what we have isn't working because your setup is maybe a little bit different, it can be just a matter of going down to your local hardware store and just seeing what hoses they have down there, because they usually sell these, I think they're PVC or PUL hoses and polyurethane, and they should have them, you know, like on spools, and you should be able to buy short links, however long or short you want, and play around with those. But again, I recommend taking your chamber down there and sizing it, whichever chamber it is you have, to the hose. Now let's talk a little bit about that Food Saver pump. So this pump I have over here, when I was first doing these videos, and I was actually getting a good seal using that. Well, that Food Saver was already having issues with pumping and with sealing, and all of a sudden it stopped working at being able to pump up the jars. I tried it again this morning because I haven't used it in a while, just to see, and again, could not get it to pull a seal. And so some of the issues people are having are actually with their Food Saver pump. So either it's a cheaper Food Saver that just doesn't have the strength to pull a vacuum on the chamber itself, though it may work great on the Food Saver tops, or on the bags, it just might not be strong enough to pull a vacuum on the chamber. So either you need a stronger pump, or your food saver is like mine and it's old and it's just done. It's just lost its ability to be able to pull a good vacuum, because that never worked really good anyway when it came to sealing the regular mouth lids with the food saver top. I always had issues with that, and that's why I switched to the brake bleeder and stopped having problems, because I can pump this up as far as I want and not have any issues with getting a good seal on my jars, whether it be I use the food saver tops or the chamber. I've always had success in using the brake bleeder pump itself. Let's say you ordered the chamber to go with your food saver and it's not working, and you try messing around with some different things, but your food saver pump is just not strong enough. Here's a couple other options you can look into. Now, I'm not going to remember all the names, but I know some people were able to find different types of pumps that not food saver. Some of them are other brands that do a similar thing that are actually for vacuum sealing bags and jars, but some are pumps that you can get at Harbor Freight and other places. Some are cheap, some are expensive, and since I'm not going to know for sure what all worked best for everyone, what I'm hoping people will do is they'll come into this video that bought the chamber and bought a different type of pump to use with it, and share with us what you got and how well it worked for your chamber. The other thing is you can go to the brake bleeder method here, the brake bleeder pump method. So as long as your brake bleeder hose is snug enough that this adapter hose will fit inside, this will work. But again, what that means then is going back to doing it by hand. And I realize that's going to be frustrating for some people who do not have the strength in their hand or the arms to pump that up. You can put a couple different jars in here at a time. This will hold 1 quart jar or a pint and a half pint at the same time. Unfortunately, it's not quite tall enough to hold 2 pint jars at a time, but a half pint or a couple of half pints or a half pint and a pint, it will do that, and then a single quart. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful. Thanks for watching. Take care.